Katsuro watched distractedly as the trees of the surrounding woodland moved by in a blur outside the windows of the large, dark green rover which sped him to his new assignment. It was hard for him to imagine that such a dense forest and pockets of wetland could exist so close to the bustle and grandeur of Moscow. It had only been a week since he had been called into his manager's office at the Yamashita headquarters in Tokyo. Katsuro was only a mere junior systems analyst, and he had been reticent to face his employer as he had felt some chastisement imminent due to his recent sick leave a few months previous. His relief at seeing the smile on the older Ichiro's face was like cool rain over the ragged, dry edge of his nerves. "Katsuro, please have a seat," Ichiro had said after his modest bow. "I know you must be curious as to the nature of this little visit. I must say that I am always enjoying to see you, Katsuro. It is like seeing a piece of history living before me." Ichiro was, of course, referring to the well-known fact that Katsuro was a direct descendant of the relatively famous shinobi family of Aiga known as Akinokami, from whom Katsuro's family drew their name. Still wondering if this warm greeting would turn sour, Katsuro nodded and smiled as he fought the urge to begin explaining that he had been very ill and had no choice but to remain at home for the week. "Now first, I will begin by telling you that you have been chosen for a great honor." Katsuro glanced up with astonishment and saw that there were a number of contracts laid out carefully on Ichiro's desk. "Do you remember last year when you took the mandatory psychological evaluation?" Katsuro could not have forgotten the bizarre series of tests which every employee at Yamashita had been subjected to. "Yes," he answered as he watched Ichiro studying a folder with his name and birthday written in bold across the back. "Good. You must have realized that it was no simple company activity." "It did seem strange, sir." "Yes, that is because it was in fact a very different kind of evaluation. You see, Katsuro, you have been chosen out of thousands of employees, me included, for a very special project. This is going to sound very strange, but you have been found to be possessed of a certain heightened perception than most ordinary people." Katsuro quickly looked down as a burst of childhood memories began flooding his mind. "If you are referring to my illness, then you must know by my file that I was treated for it throughout my childhood, and I have not shown symptoms in years." "That's just it, Katsuro. Have you ever contemplated that perhaps this condition was no illness?" "I am afraid I do not understand what you mean, sir. There are a great many people who believe that seeing the dead is no mental illness, Katsuro." "What else could it be? A gift, perhaps?" Katsuro nearly laughed out loud as he remembered the endless, sleepless nights of his pre-adolescence, witnessing bizarre shapes and figures moving through the darkness. "What if you are possessed of an extraordinary ability, which has been repressed by this cocktail of pills that you have been taking since you were a child? With all due respect, I cannot accept that I was some misunderstood, psychically gifted little child who was drugged into normality by an uncomprehending adult world." "Then you would completely reject an attempt to explore this possibility under the behest of your employer. You see, Katsuro, Yamashita has been in possession of a certain piece of property which lies in Moscow Oblast." "Russia?" "Yes. And it is the belief of certain members of our board that there are aspects of the property which can only be understood via the very talents which you seem to have repressed." "A haunted house in the Soviet Union?" Katsuro could not believe that he was in fact having this completely irrational conversation with his manager. "Sir, I really cannot allow myself to fall into this way of thinking. You must understand that I have spent years doing my best to make sure that I don't suffer a relapse of the hallucinations I had as a child." "Then you refuse?" "I must regretfully decline this offer." "Then I must accept this as your resignation." What? "Katsuro, if you refuse the assignment which is given to you by your employer, then it is automatically grounds for termination." Katsuro's mouth fell open as his face reddened with rage and disbelief. He had worked for Yamashita for over a decade, With the birth of his second child, a daughter, and the purchase of a new apartment, there was no way he could afford to go hunting for another job. So here he was, riding farther and farther into what appeared to be a miniature wilderness somewhere in Russia. The car had turned off the marked road and onto a long, newly cut trail which burrowed further and further into the thickets and marsh. Katsuro looked at the driver and, leaning forward, tapped him on the shoulder. The man, who was younger than Katsuro, was singing something about some place called Portofino, along with an MP3 of Leonid Agutin. Katsuro, who was far from a Russian music enthusiast, still cannot help but think that the music seemed out of place for the man's age. The man, who looked back smiling and began to speak in Russian, quickly switched to broken English when he saw the confused look on Katsuro's face. "How much further?" Katsuro asked as the vehicle bounced through several dips in the muddy trail. "Long ways. Sit back and enjoy Leonid. You know Agutin?" "I think I am familiar. Long hair, classical guitars, right?" "Hey, yes! You know Agutin." The man seemed very pleased and turned up the volume as he began to remove a thermos from a large bag in the seat beside him. Katsuro had almost expected him to reveal a bottle of vodka, but quickly chastised himself for his stereotypical mode of thought. The young man seemed polite, sober, and a very capable driver, despite his profound interest in the music, which he seemed continuously swayed to and sang with. Katsuro settled back in his seat and again began looking at the satellite view on his laptop of the area. It seemed unreasonable that someone had built such a house so far away from any access to the modern world, let alone a vast estate such as what he could see on the image. "Hey, can you tell me anything about this place?" he said, stammering as he fought to reclaim what English he knew. "Oh boy," his driver answered as he turned down the music and withdrew a pack of some unrecognizable brand of cigarettes from his pocket. "You mind if I smoke?" he said, holding the pack up. "Only if I can have one," he said, smiling as the young man flashed him a wink of his dark eyes. The man tapped the pack on the steering wheel and offered him one, which had fallen forward. As they smoked, Katsuro began to feel at least somewhat more comfortable, even if he was smoking again after only a month, supposedly ending the habit for life. "Don't feel bad, comrade. It's a very healthy blend of tobacco. It has almost no toxins." Katsuro did not say that at this point he would have smoked a poisonous rank tobacco from the last century if it had been offered. "So, did you draw the short end of the straw or what?" Katsuro laughed at the misspoken expression as he flipped his ashes at the crack in the window. I guess you could say that. Well, I'll tell you what I know. I work for Yamashita now for 9 months, ever since they began this project. This house, it was owned by the Maskhadovs. They are a very, he paused as he searched for the right word, infamous family. They own very big business and have a lot of money, but they have a dark history. Back in old days, even before communists, they were known to be a family of entertainers. They were like the Europeans called gypsies. They travel around playing music and telling fortunes. They were very popular in the days of the mediums and seances. Somewhere along the line, they got very rich and built this town out here. Town? I thought it was just a mansion. Yes, there is a mansion, but also many other houses for the family. They hide out here by this lake. This road we are on was not here a year ago. Yamashita had it built when they got tired of coming and going by helicopter. That was the only access. By helicopter? Or by plane. They had a small airport set up behind the wall. Yes, I can see the wall on this satellite photo. Just wait, comrade. Have you ever heard of a wall built around a house that has no gate? The driver laughed again as they rolled down the steep embankment and through a stream which would have trapped a smaller vehicle. After another 15 minutes of bouncing and climbing, they came to a clearing which opened to a vast overgrown field which surrounded the massive stone monument which was the Maskhadov estate wall. Katsuro's jaw dropped as he gazed with amazement at the seemingly endless gray ring of granite which disappeared into the horizon on both sides. As the rover approached, he saw that workers had broken down a segment of the enormous blocks so that the makeshift road could continue through. They slowly drove through the gap, and Katsuro could now see that the top of the wall was covered in an ornate and deadly-looking wrought iron line of twisting spikes and blades, which had been crafted to resemble a huge, thorny metal vine. "This is incredible," he said under his breath, but the driver still heard. "Yes, and these people just left a few years ago. They vanished like the wind. But they are alive? I mean, somebody is still running their company, right? It's a big mystery. No one knows exactly what happened. Or maybe Yamashita does, but they are not telling yet. They acquired this land, but no one knows how." It was then that Katsuro saw the distant buildings rising over the side of a huge and pristine lake. There were a series of villas which stood beside a stately gray mansion home, looming regal and silent at the top of the hill. "They must have been extraordinarily wealthy," Katsuro said as he tapped the driver's shoulder and gestured for another cigarette. "Exactly. So why would they sell all this to Yamashita? Why would an electronics company from Japan want it? Because they're completely insane," Katsuro thought to himself as the rover pulled to a stop at the front steps of the main house. The driver threw back his arm over the seat and looked Katsuro directly in the eyes. "You cannot tell me what you are doing out here. I know that much." Katsuro nodded as he blew smoke out from his nose. "I am supposed to leave you out here alone, comrade. My name is Valentin, and you have my cell phone number. There is power, water, food, and drink. There is internet as well, but you are so far out that it will be a long time anyone getting to you should you need help. I wish you the best of luck in whatever you are supposed to be doing here. I only want to tell you that if you should choose to leave early, do not hesitate to call me at any time. I don't know how much they are paying you, but there are many things in life more important than money, yes? If only you knew," Katsuro thought, as he opened the door and slid out into the noonday heat. Valentin unloaded his bags, and then opening the passenger side door, produced a carton of cigarettes from his bag, which he handed to Katsuro. "You will need these more than me, I think," he said as he slapped Katsuro on the shoulder. "Remember, comrade, you want to leave, you call me, day or night." "Thank you," Katsuro said, as he placed the carton under his arm and lifted the suitcase. He watched as Valentin climbed back behind the wheel of the rover and started the engine, and with one last wave, the Russian turned in the circle drive and made his way back towards the ominous wall. Yamashita had effectively picked the house clean of any and all furniture or trappings of human comfort. Katsuro found that every room had been laid bare by some rapid and painstaking excavation of all earthly possessions that may have been left. He found that a living area had been made for him in what might have been a huge study at some point in the house's history. There was a cot for sleeping, a desk for working, and a table for eating. Logs had been cut and placed by the fireplace, as well as a small electric heater which was plugged into a modern outlet on the wall. There were 2 glass doors which opened to a balcony that overlooked the lake and the estate grounds. Katsuro dropped his bags onto the floor and dropped onto the cot, where he lit and smoked the cigarette, staring at the high ceiling with morose, lonely confusion. They had taken his medication. This had been the first requirement of his assignment, and already he was feeling the effects as the meds were gradually wearing off. He had been on a steady regimen of tranquilizers, antidepressants, and antipsychotics since he was 13 years old. Only once had he been without, and that had been 2 months ago, when he had grown so ill that he had lain bedridden for over a week. There had been a mix-up at his pharmacy between his doctor and the insurance company. He had been refused his routine refills, and the consequences had been devastating. What if there was no mistake? A voice said calmly in his mind. What if Yamashita organized your involuntary detox on purpose? He grimaced as he recognized the growing paranoid thoughts as symptoms of his withdrawal. "Shut up," he said angrily to the voice as he curled into a ball and closed his eyes. "I'm just tired. I need to go to sleep." He stared out the doors at the afternoon sun as it made its way over the distant trees. It would be nightfall soon, and he would be alone in the darkness of the enormous, empty house, with nothing but his computer and a carton of cigarettes. He missed his wife and children more than he had ever thought possible. He thought of the small, chubby infant he would not be present to lie in her cradle, and he wept until finally he drifted into unconsciousness. He awakened into darkness. He lay still and watched as the empty blackness was suddenly broken by quick, sudden flashes of lightning and booms of thunder which seemed to shake the walls. He stared at the glass doors of the balcony and saw the storm which raged outside. As he slowly began to become aware of his surroundings and remembered with horrible clarity the events which had brought him to this place, he realized that the room was freezing. He stumbled through the darkness and found the work table, where in the luminescence of lightning he located the small lamp and turned it on. He sighed audibly with relief that the power had not gone out as he sought out the electric heater and crouched before it as he rubbed his cold, numbed hands and awaited the small coils to warm. Surveying his surroundings, he was quickly besieged by the notion that he was within some mausoleum or tomb. As the small fan began to finally expel wondrous heat, he went to his bag where he dug out a small MP3 stereo system and plugged it into the power circuit behind the computer desk. His older son had prepared him a series of playlists, which he had said would lift his spirits while he was so far from home. He smiled as he scrolled through the menu and found dozens of downloaded J-pop albums on top of a mishmash of international recordings he did not recognize. One band name caught his attention, however, as he studied the small album cover of a raven perched before a swirling purple spiral produced over the listing. He hit play and began listening as a strangely soothing melody combining American blues and electronica began playing. There was a power and depth to the music which he immediately found comforting as he began to try and organize his thoughts concerning the situation. He had come to the conclusion that he had little choice but to accept this as a battle which he had to win. He had been put into this situation where misguided idiots had mistaken his mental illness for some sort of psychic power, and they were determined to push him into a full regression in order to satisfy some bizarre theory they had devised concerning his estate. One night, when Katsuro had been in college, he and his roommate had went out drinking and loitering at various restaurants and karaoke bars. By the end of the evening, his roommate had questioned him about the medications which he carried with him everywhere. In his intoxication, Katsuro had divulged the truth about his childhood, and to his shock found his friend very understanding and interested. "But Katsuro, what if you really were seeing ghosts?" his friend had said, as he played with sushi on his plate. "What if you were born to help them move on to another realm or something?" Katsuro had encountered this particular theory before, and began laughing sadly as he sipped his beer. "You know, that is just what my aunt told my parents before they exiled her from their lives. So you don't even think that this is in the least bit possible? Look, Rikuto, the spirits I hallucinated were hardly what I call lucid. These were not conscious, wandering souls which you could just sit down and have a therapy session with, okay? Have you ever tried to talk to someone who has advanced Alzheimer's? These visions were roaming inside an impenetrable world of memory and emotion. Maybe 1 in 100 may have even noticed that I could see them. Hundreds? How many did you see? They were everywhere, Rico. Imagine that no matter where you went or what you were doing, there were just thick clouds of spirits moving oblivious to each other and everything else. Yet the strange thing was that not everyone who died was amongst them. At the very end, before the doctors began treating me, I had come to the conclusion that just about all of them were more or less free to go, so to speak. The ghosts that I was seeing were just those who couldn't bring themselves to release something from this world. I would scream at them in the night to just stop holding on to whatever memories or desires were holding me here. But it was like speaking to a television. They just continued on in their dream world, never listening. Rikuto dropped his chopsticks as if he had instantly lost his appetite. That's why the Buddha says to desire nothing. I have an illness, Rikudo, and that's all it is. My mind created this distortion out of some loose wire in my brain. It was never real, if you say so. But it sounds very strange to me that your illness was so specific. Maybe, maybe not. Did you know that there's a form of schizophrenia where the sufferer hears music playing all the time? Not voices or visions, but constant, never-ending music? It doesn't sound that bad, does it? Still, the sufferers often would give anything to make the music stop. As Katsuro remembered these words, he lit a cigarette and smiled as he grew even more grateful for the sound of the music which played. Otherwise, he would be alone in the silence. He rose and moved to the old well-used fireplace, where he found a small canister of lighter fluid and a book of long matches besides the cut logs. As he stacked the logs and opened the flue, his stomach began to ache with hunger. Leaving the fire to grow, he went to the door and switched on the lights of the long hallway. He gazed at the walls as the ornate fixtures flashed on and saw oval and square spaces on the plaster where pictures had hung until none too recently. He also noted areas on the floor where pedestals may have stood for long years before their untimely removal. He began to cautiously wander the emptiness until he came to a large chamber where the walls were covered in huge windows, and a chandelier hung over a section where he could imagine a massive dining room table laid out with candles and centerpieces. Spotting a doorway to the side, he flipped another light switch and smiled with relief that he had found the kitchen. Yamashita had generously left a refrigerator and stove, which matched what he had imagined to be the high-end sort of appliances he would envision for such a luxurious home. As he opened the wooden pantry doors, he saw what food left was probably by the previous occupants. There were stacks of canned vegetables, soups, and dumplings beside the boxes of cereal and a cornucopia of condiments. He lifted a large jar of honey and eyed its amber contents lustily before taking it to the counter. Now searching the fridge, he found milk, tea, butter, and orange juice, along with lunch meats and a crisper filled with cheese and ground beef. He immediately set about preparing his meal with a zest as he began frying the hamburger on the stove in a pan from the cupboard and popping bread into the toaster on the counter. Soon, he was back in the study eating at his work table as he listened to the storm raging outside. He switched on his laptop and wiped the honey from his sticky fingers as he typed a quick message to his family telling them he had arrived safely and would be calling in the morning. He was blissfully spooning large heaps of ground beef into his mouth when he saw the message light blinking on the screen. Thinking that his wife had stayed up late and was returning his email, he immediately clicked the small envelope emblem. What he beheld was 2 sentences which immediately shattered whatever positive emotions he had managed to acquire. You are in great danger. You need to leave the house. He stared at the words as immediately his head swam with dizzying fear. His hands shook as he almost dropped the plate and spoon to the floor. Carefully placing them on the desk, he leaned forward and typed back, "Who are you?" Katsuro could barely breathe as the thunder crashed outside and the lights flickered, as if on the verge of leaving him in darkness. He saw the return emblem reappear, and with trembling fingers clicked it. There was only one word, sitting small and insignificant at the top of the screen. Maskhadov. Before he could even think of how to react or feel at the sight of the ominous email, a loud window shaking boomed like the explosion of a bomb over the mansion shook the walls. Katsuro watched with despair as the lights went out and he was left alone with only the dancing low flames of the fireplace to comfort him. The battery of the laptop kept the ghostly radiance from the screen vivid and bright, but he could see that he had almost lost his connection. He could not reply to the eerie and foreboding message. It's happening already, he thought frantically. I'm losing my grip on reality. This cannot be real. He studied the word intently, as if trying to dispel it like a bad dream, which could be altered by the force and lucidity of his willpower. However, the word remained, and he was still alone in the mansion. He stood and threw another log onto the fire as he paced the room in an attempt to gain some perspective on what was happening. What if this was part of some bizarre psychological experiment performed by Yamashita? He was but their frightened test subject. How should he react? Should he be ignoring the warning? Should he even have a choice? He closed his eyes and took several deep breaths as an impending feeling of presence seemed to be enfolding him like a heavy, dismal cloud. There is something here, the irrational voice in his mind said. He opened his eyes and gazed into the shadows which bobbed and wavered just outside the light given by the low flames of the fire. The dead are gone, he answered the voice. They do not remain, hovering around us like deranged mental patients. Even as the thought entered his mind, he realized with tangible anxiety that what he felt was intrinsically different than what he had felt as a child when he had seen ghosts. The presence seemed infinitely darker and more inviolate than any wandering soul he had conjured from his troubled child's mind. The Maskhadov said you are in danger, the argumentative voice said calmly. The Maskhadov is some Yamashita computer hacker hired to fuck with my brain, he replied angrily. Who are you anyway? He asked of this annoying, intrusive thought. Just consider me your helpful little conscience, like that cricket in the old American Disney movie about the puppet boy. You are a symptom of my slide into a manic psychotic episode. You can choose to believe that, but me and Maskhadov are all you've got. Oh yeah, and maybe that driver guy. You should probably give him a call. You don't understand. If I leave here, then I will lose my job, and my family will be in a horrible position. They're not going to be doing that great when some guy from Yamashita shows up and delivers the news that you went missing on this little field trip into madness. Even if you believe that Yamashita is behind that little email, that doesn't seem a little crazy of you to stick around while they prod you into insanity? You can get another job, but your family needs you alive and sane. Katsuro was beginning to become irritated by the voice's logic. He eyed his cell phone and, picking it up, saw that he had no bars. There! Are you happy? Even if I wanted to call that Valentin guy, I couldn't do it. I don't have a signal. My advice to you then is to call his number as soon as you can. Just shut up. Katsuro turned up the music and once more looked out into the darkness of the large chamber. He could feel it out there, hungry and impatient. The presence, which his paranoia said was watching him. It was studying him, waiting for something. Maybe waiting for the last threads of cruel logic to snap so that it could lunge at him from the darkness and attack. It was surrounding him like a cloud of invisible toxic fumes. He could smell the heavy damp air, and within it was a scent vaguely familiar. He could remember being at his grandparents' home in the country and wandering from the yard into the woods. He had walked down the narrow path a little ways, and there at its end was a pile of vegetation and wood washed into a mound of refuse by the flooded stream. The smell was so distinct and repulsive. It was... The lights suddenly flashed back on, and he almost fell from his chair with surprise. He glanced at the corners of the room, until just now clouded in shadow, and saw to his relief that they were plain and unoccupied. There! See! He shouted triumphantly to the condescending voice which had spoken to him as if he were a scared child. There is nothing! No spirits of the dead, waiting to appear and besiege me. Exactly, the voice responded. You've been off your meds long enough that if there were any ghosts, you would be seeing them by now, Katsuro. How many places did you ever go as a child where you didn't see any ghosts? That is irrelevant. I do not see any because they do not exist. Really? Because it seems more likely that you would be seeing them if there were any here. How long did it take when you couldn't get your pills a few months ago before you started seeing the spirits again, Katsuro? It wasn't even a day before there were ghosts in the garden. There are no ghosts here. The thing that's here is much, much worse. I wish you would just switch the fuck off. Why don't you ask him, Katsura? Why don't you ask your friend, Maskhadov, about what's in this house? Because I would be indulging in my dementia. Really. Because I think it's because you're afraid of what he has to say. Fine. If I play along with this little game of yours, then will you shut up? Sounds fair. Katsura stared at the computer screen for a long moment before he felt the voice begin to once more badger him. Quickly, before the nagging began anew, he typed a message. Who are you? And what is going on? Then, before he could doubt his actions, he hit send. He waited several minutes, but just as he was beginning to think that there would be no answer, a message appeared, waiting to be opened. As he began to read, he felt a cold chill pass over him as the lights once more flickered throughout the house. It said, "My name is Victor Stefan Maskhadov. I was born on May 8th, 1984.